Two things fill my mind with ever-increasing awe and admiration: the staring heavens above me and the moral law within me. This is the epitaph inscribed on Kant's tomb. It is perhaps the quotation that more than any other captures the heart of his philosophy: the greatness of humanity on one hand and the mystery of the cosmos on the other one. With the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant sought to rescue metaphysics from its decline and put an end to the endless disputes between rationalists and empirists. Yet, upon completing this immensely complex work, he realized it was not enough. Not everything can be explained through categories and theoretical reason. We might therefore say that the greatest discovery of the first critique is the fundamentally limited nature of human understanding. Three guiding questions frame Kant's inquiry. What can we know? What must we do? What may we hope? Yet all three questions ultimately converge into one fundamental problem to which they are deeply connected. What is a man? In this video, we will explore how humanity cannot be reduced to reason alone, and how Kant extends his investigation into new dimensions, particularly morality, aesthetics, and history. As we have seen in the previous video, the Critique of Pure Reason deprives metaphysics of any theoretical foundation. In most philosophies before Kant, not only the theories about the essence of human beings, the world and God, but also the principles guiding human behavior were based on metaphysical assumptions. At the end of the first critique, Kant finds himself facing the problem of how to ground morality within a transcendental philosophy, one that excludes metaphysical dogmatism. The moral question thus mirrors the epistemological. In epistemology, the task was to ground the validity of knowledge not on the things in themselves, but on the subject's a priori forms. Similarly, in ethics, the goal is to ground the universality of moral law not on a metaphysical dimension, but on human reason. That is, just as the problem of knowledge involved identifying the subjective a priori conditions for objective knowledge, the moral problem involves identifying the a priori conditions for universally valid actions. Kant addresses this in the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals and the critique of practical reason. So, which subjective motives for human action can claim to have universal value and become objective reasons for action? We proceed by elimination. Certainly not the motives of sensibility, since these are rooted in individual inclinations and vary from case to case. The good will, which must be valid universally, must therefore be determined not by sensibility but by reason. However, while humans naturally tend to follow their inclinations, rational precepts always take the form of imperatives, that is, they are commands which the subject follows only by exercising self-control through reason. These rational imperatives are divided into two types: hypothetical imperatives, which command an action for the sake of achieving a particular goal. Since the goal isn't necessarily shared by all, these imperatives cannot have universal validity. And category imperatives, which command unconditionally. The action they prescribe must be performed in every case, regardless circumstances of personal interest, simply because reason commands it. This expresses the law of duty for duty's sake, and is therefore universally and necessarily valid. Only the categorical imperative satisfies the requirements of universality and necessity that define the good will and moral action. Since it's independent of specific conditions or goals, the categorical imperative has no material content, it is purely formal. It doesn't say what you should do, but how you should act in order for your action to be morally good. It focuses not on the outcome. It doesn't say what you should do, but how you should act in order for your action to be morally good. It focuses not on the outcome, but on the intention behind the action. Its most general formulation is: act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. The maxim, which expresses the subjective rule of an action, must be capable of becoming a universal law, that is, an objective rule for human behavior. This fundamental formula has three further formulations that specify different aspects of it. Act as if the maxim of your action were to become, through your will, a universal law of nature. When people act morally, their actions, guided by a single rational principle and producing sensible effects in the phenomenal world, create a moral order in the human world, analogous to the physical order in nature. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of another, always at the same time as an end, and never merely as a means. Moral action requires the utmost respect for the law of reason. But reason and humanity are inseparable. You cannot respect reason without respecting the humanity present in yourself. For example, suicide is morally wrong. Or in others, for example, murder, harm, exploitation, or insult are forbidden. Act only so that your will can regard itself at the same time as making universal law through its maxim. In moral action, the human will is guided solely by reason. Since rationality is a part of human nature, by obeying reason, a person is ultimately obeying themselves. Kant's ethic is therefore an ethic of autonomy. Through reason, a person gives the law to themselves. Conversely, any behavior where the will is determined by inclination or motives that are not purely rational, and are thus rooted in sensibility, is an expression of heteronomy, since the person is subject to a law that does not come from their rational nature. For Kant, the moral law is a fact that man discovers in his own rational conscience. Like all empirical facts, it does not need deduction, but it justifies itself. In fact, it allows us to deduce the practical reality of a concept that, in the Critique of Pure Reason, was all admitted as a mere possibility: freedom. From a theoretical standpoint, the existence of freedom cannot be proven because, as a thesis of the third cosmological antinomy, it lies outside the realm of phenomena. From a practical standpoint, however, freedom is an essential condition, ratio essendi, of morality. A morality without freedom would be impossible, as it would negate the subject's capacity to be the primary cause and responsible agent of their own actions. Without freedom, the autonomy of the subject, that is, the ability of the moral individual to self-determine and be their own legislator, would be impossible. And this autonomy is the essence of moral action. On the other hand, through the experience of freedom, man becomes aware of the moral fact. Thus, morality is the cognitive condition, ratio conoscendi, of freedom. Although we can never theoretically confirm its truth, we must accept human freedom to avoid contradicting the factual reality of the moral law. Freedom is a postulate of practical reason. Alongside freedom, Kant recognizes two other practical postulates: the immortality of the soul and the existence of God. The reality of these concepts is required by a central idea in Kant's philosophy, the highest good. While virtue is the supreme good, it still lacks the element of happiness to realize the highest good, a perfect, complete good. Basic justice demands that the virtues also be rewarded with happiness in proportion to their merit. However, the proportional union of virtue and happiness, which constitutes the highest good, poses a problem. One who seeks to be virtuous, following the pure law of rational duty, cannot pursue happiness, since happiness, being sensory in nature, would give the action a particular, rather than universal, character, making it heteronymous, rather than autonomous. Moreover, the highest good purposes the possibility for the moral subject to achieve perfect virtue, holiness, the complete conformity of the will to the moral law, and thus to deserve the total happiness, beatitude. But for a finite, sensory being like human, holiness, which belongs to God, whose will is immediately in harmony with the rational law due to his lack of sensory constraints, is more an ideal to approach indefinitely than an achievable reality. According to Kant, these problems find resolution in the testimony of moral consent. The postulate of the immortality of the soul guarantees the individual the possibility of an infinite moral progress after death, which is merely a phenomenon and thus says nothing about the possibility of eternal nominal life, allowing them to gradually approach holiness. The postulate of the existence of God recognizes an intelligent cause of the world, capable of ordering nature, the realm of happiness, in harmony with moral intention. The postulates of freedom, the immortality of the soul, and the existence of God give men certainties that were inaccessible through theoretical reason. In this sense, practical reason holds primacy over theoretical reason. as it gives reality to concepts that, in the Critique of Pure Reason, were only theoretical possibilities. However, and Kant insists on this point, practical reason does not extend the limits of knowledge set by the first critique. The validity of these postulates is not theoretical but purely practical. They provide moral certainty of freedom, immortality, and God's existence, but never theoretical proof, which would require a synthetic a priori judgment possible only in the phenomenal realm. The affirmation of God's existence allows Kant to transition from morality to religion, analyzed in religion within the bounds of bare reason. Religion does not differ in content from ethics but simply acknowledges moral duties as divine commandments. God's will, which commands men to follow the same laws prescribed by moral reason, is not arbitrary but fully conforms to universal rational legislation. Religious faith becomes rational faith, free from superstition and fanaticism. Even Christology is rigorously confined within the bounds of mere reason. Christ serves as an exemplary figure not because of supernatural traits, such as miracles, but because his conduct aligns with the rational ideal of moral perfection. Similarly, Christianity is the best religion because it's revealed and its scriptural content does not conflict with pure. In the Critique of Pure Reason, the synthetic a priori judgment is a determining judgment because it determines its object through the a priori forms of the understanding. In the Critique of Judgment, Kant contrasts this with the reflective judgment, which does not theoretically construct its object by submitting empirical data under the categories of understanding. Instead, it interprets natural objects based on the principle of purposiveness or finality. This principle has no cognitive value, since purposiveness is not a category of the understanding, yet it carries universality because it responds to an a priori demand of the transcendental subject. Reflective judgment takes two forms, depending on how purposiveness is applied. Aesthetic judgment, when the purposiveness relates to the subject's feeling of harmony with the representation of an object, we have the judgment of taste, which defines the beautiful. When purposiveness is applied, on the other hand, to the internal order of nature, we have the judgment of purpose, which interprets natural objects if they were designed. In aesthetic judgment, the feeling of purposiveness arises from a free play of faculties, a spontaneous harmony between imagination and understanding. The imagination provides sensory content, not as raw data, but as freely interpreted projects. The understanding, in turn, detects a kind of regularity in this imaginative activity, allowing it to find agreement with its own concepts without the constraints of a priori synthesis. This harmony between imagination and understanding forms the basis of the judgment of taste, which defines the beautiful. The beautiful then is the form of purposiveness in an object, perceived without the representation of a purpose. Beautiful is also what pleases without interest, meaning it brings pleasure not from sensory enjoyment, but from mere representation. Beautiful is also what pleases without a concept, since this pleasure is grounded in a shared common sense among all subjects with taste. We have to distinguish beautiful from the useful, which serves a purpose, the pleasant, linked to sensory gratification, the true, expressed in conceptual knowledge. Although beauty has an affinity with morality, as an perception of nature's beauty suggests a moral disposition, it is not the same as the good, which involves moral duty. Kant thus asserts the complete autonomy of aesthetic value. Alongside the beautiful, aesthetic judgment also considers the sublime. The sublime arises from dual feeling provoked by nature vastness, mathematical sublime, and power, dynamical sublime. Confronted with sublime, man feels two things. On one hand, the pain from recognizing his own limits and insignificance, and on the other hand, the pleasure from realizing that his rational and moral dignity elevates him above nature. While aesthetic judgment perceives purposiveness as an immediate feeling, theological judgment expresses it conceptually. However, the concept of purpose here is not a category of the understanding, but a rational idea. Kant argues that the categories of the understanding, essential for physics, cannot fully explain even the simplest natural organism. The life of a worm or the growth of a blade of a grass cannot be explained mechanically, but only through the reflective concept of internal purposiveness. An organism is not just a mechanical assembly of parts, but an indivisible whole where each part exists for the sake of the whole. This idea can be extended by analogy to all of nature, seen as a system of ends where everything serves as an ultimate purpose. Since man, as a moral being with a noumenal essence, transcends nature, he can be identified as his ultimate purpose. Teleological judgment, thus, allows us to view nature as favoring moral realization. Furthermore, teleology supports a moral theology. The purposiveness of nature suggests an intelligent cause, God, who designed it for a final end. Kant insists that the concept of purpose in teleological judgment is not a cognitive category, but a regulative idea of reason. Therefore, we may act as if nature has an intelligent cause, but we cannot know that it does. Teleology has a heuristic value, helping scientific discovery, but not theoretical validity. Even the best teleological explanation of life does not extend theoretical knowledge. A blade of grass remains a mystery. Rejecting Cartesian mechanicism, which tried to explain organisms purely through causal determinism, Kant's teleology paves the way for organic and vitalist theories of nature, which would flourish in Romanticism and idealism. In the answer to the question, "What is enlightenment?" from 1784, Kant famously wrote, "Enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity, namely the liberation from the inability to think for oneself without relying on others." This duty to fully develop one's rational faculties reappears in the idea for a universal history from a cosmopolitan perspective from 1784, Kant's most systematic work on the philosophy of history. Nature has endowed humans with disposition for the use of reason, which must be fully realized over time. Through successive generations, humanity progressively fulfills its rational destiny, or culture, using social antagonisms as its driving force. This competitive struggle between individuals, though seemingly selfish, unknowingly advances the broader plan of the impersonal historical force, nature providence. However, for this antagonism to be productive, it must unfold within political institutions that prevent it from degenerating into war and align it with law. In Metaphysics of Morals, Kant defines law as follows: the set of conditions under which the freedom of one can coexist with the freedom of others, according to a universal law of liberty. Law and culture, the unfolding of human reason, develop hand in hand throughout history. The first historical step toward realizing law is the transition from the state of nature, which Kant equates with the state of war, to civil society. Yet, the state can only fully embody law when it adopts a republican form of government, where sovereignty is exercised solely in obedience to law, reflecting the people's will. Power is representative and divided, checks and balance. A complete realization of law requires its extension beyond the state of the international realm. In Perpetual Peace from 1795, Kant envisions a federation of states that bans war as a means of solving conflicts, submits disputes to a shared parliamentary body. Initially, Kant saw the revolution in France, inspired by the republicanism, as the nucleus for such a federation. And although his optimism waned over time, the project remained a moral imperative, a categorical demand of practical reason for humanity to strive toward. This is it with Kant's philosophy for today. Thank you for watching this video. I'm Ivan, and this is Empyrean, the Academy of Philosophy and Fine Arts.